Hello, this is Robin Harford from Plants and People podcast, eatweeds.co.uk and foragingcourses.com. I'm here with Viola Sampson, who is a complementary therapist who has a passion for wild fermentation. So, hi Viola.
Hi.
And can you just give a bit of an introduction as to, how did you get into wild fermentation? What's this big kind of a obsession that you have?
Yeah, it is an obsession or a passion. Um, so my background was, well, I wanted to be a genetic engineer actually.
Ooh.
So I went to
Sounds
university.
ominous.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, to study genetic engineering, which meant that I did basically 2 years of a kind of medical training, which is how you did it in those days, medical biosciences. But because I was interested in plants and particularly wanted to go into crops, I also studied plant biochemistry and ecology as well throughout that time. And so that ended up with me working with bacteria in laboratory settings. So that's sort of chapter one.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a sort of long wiggly journey that includes having gut issues after travelling to Southern Africa, and potentially from before then as well, as we might talk about later. And then I studied complementary therapy, studied craniosacral therapy, and the fermentation sort of landed in my lap really in terms of looking into gut health. And the gut microbiome, which are the microbial communities in our gut, and discovering that actually we used to eat a lot of fermented foods. Like every culture around the world has fermented foods like sauerkraut or kimchi, or there's miso, to name just a very few. Yogurt, that's a really obvious one that most people can think of.
Sourdough, that kind of thing?
Sourdough, although that's more for taste rather than for the probiotics, for the bacteria, that the health promoting bacteria. And then I basically, as soon as I got interested in that, I discovered someone called Sandor Katz happened to be visiting London, and there happened to be a space on his workshop, and I leapt into it. In fact, a friend gave half of it to me for a birthday present, and it's just been a gift that's just kept on giving. So yeah.
That's really cool, because Sandor was a good friend of my plant mentor, Frank Cook. They did a double act in America that before, fermentation and wild food kind of took off. And Frank would get everyone to go out and gather plants on day one, and then on day two, Sandor would take people through the process of fermenting them.
Great. Yeah.
So, yeah.
They're real natural buddies, I think, those two practices.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah.
So, why eat them? Why not just get canned or vinegared? Why not preserve your plants in vinegar? You mentioned probiotics, so why not just go down to Waitrose and get Yakult or Yokult or whatever that horrible bloody creamy stuff
Well,
is?
don't get me started on that. But
yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so this is the way we used to preserve our food up until very recently. So only, a couple of generations ago. So it might be that your parents or your grandparents didn't have a fridge. So the fridge was invented not that long ago. So what we used to do would be preserve our food, our vegetables in salt, and the salt creates the environment for something called lactic acid bacteria. So they're bacteria that produce lactic acid, and that increases the acidity of the ferment, and that works very much like vinegar. Vinegar is actually acetic acid. So we're preserving our food for right through the winter, sometimes for years. For example, I think in Hungary you wouldn't want to eat a sauerkraut that was less than 4 years old, perhaps.
Wow.
Okay. That's probably at the far end. I'm sure there are lots of Hungarians who eat sauerkraut at 6 weeks old, but who knows. So and what's really wonderful, particularly in this part of the world, sort of in the temperate world, we get a glut of vegetables through the summer and into the autumn, and then we can preserve them through the winter using lacto-fermentation. And then, so tin canning was another way that relatively recently in terms of human history, that preserves food. And then, so we've got tin canning, we've got refrigeration, and also vinegar pickling. So once you could make vinegar commercially, and most vinegar that you can buy down at Tesco's or wherever is actually just made in a laboratory now, not the kind of old-fashioned way.
Without the mother?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
So it's just acetic acid. Yuck, yeah.
Does that include the white wine vinegars and all that as well?
No,
Okay.
It'll be like the pickling vinegars,
like
the white,
vinegar,
or
yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm saying that without going down to Tesco's and reading up on exactly where they get their malt vinegar. So, so, and that was a very quick way. So instead of waiting for the bacteria to do all the work producing the lactic acid, you could just quickly make acetic acid, pour it on the vegetables, and you've kind of basically got, in theory, the same thing. And now what we're seeing are people coming up with all kinds of health conditions, asthma, obesity, even mental health issues are now being linked to changes in our gut microbiome, so changes in the ecology of the microbial communities living there. So for me, it's really common sense that a food that we used to eat a lot of, perhaps every day, we don't eat at all now, and our gut health is really in decline.
Yeah.
It's not the only reason it's in decline, but for me it makes absolute common sense to reintroduce these back into our diet, and people really do report health benefits from it. So one example was me. I didn't have a cold at all last year. It's very rare for me to go through an entire winter without cold or flu, and eating this, my immune system has just been really boosted.
So they're good for your immunity?
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow, okay. So what kind of ferments are there? I mean, sauerkraut is the one that I normally say to people when I'm doing a walk, you can ferment, and I don't go too much into the fermentation side, but when people kind of look at me quizzically, I kind of say, well, sauerkraut. Oh yeah, I know sauerkraut. Right, okay, well that's a lacto ferment or lactic acid ferment. But what other ones? I mean, they've got kimchi in Korea and
Well, show me something I can't ferment, actually.
Okay.
But that's me and a few other fermenting passionistas. So yeah, kimchi. And what we think of as kimchi in the West is Napa cabbage, which we call Chinese leaf.
Okay, yeah.
Big chili paste. A basic kimchi recipe would be daikon radish, fish sauce, pack it all into a jar, spring onions, usually something like that as well. And that's tradition in the UK and in the West. That is considered kimchi, but actually there are a gazillion different kimchis. There are as many kimchis as there are Korean people making them, and they can, like I say, ferment all the things. You can end up with anything in there.
Okay, because I always thought kimchi was maybe more root based, whereas sauerkraut is more leaf based.
Yeah,
Is that?
I
No?
don't know that that's. I don't
not
know
true.
that that's
Okay.
well, it's not something I've come across.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I tend to. Both sauerkraut and kimchi have the same basic method, which is dry salting, which we can go through here.
Yeah.
But in terms of what you put in them, it's really up to your own. Well, your creativity is the only thing that hold you back, really, because you can try different flavors and they may well turn out in lots of different ways that you couldn't even imagine. So definitely worth experimenting. In terms of other lacto ferments, yogurt is a lacto ferment.
Okay.
So if you look on the side of a yogurt pot, you'll probably see lactobacillus, acidophilus, they're lactic acid bacteria. And it's the acid that curdles the milk and thickens the yogurt, and also preserves it.
Okay. So are there ways to create ferments without salting?
You can choose not to use salt. It's a little bit harder in that the salt favours the environment that lactic acid bacteria prefer. So fermentation is transformation by bacteria. It's transformation of a food by bacteria. Rotting is transformation of food by bacteria. Now, what makes the difference between our rotting leftover mashed potato and our sauerkraut is the fact that it's lactic acid bacteria doing the transformation.
Right.
Lactic acid bacteria like salt, other bacteria don't like salt. So it is absolutely possible to ferment, make sauerkraut that's salt-free. It's just you may have a few that don't work out quite so well, and you have to tend it a little bit carefully to make sure it doesn't get mould. But yeah. So
how would you do? Well, you're going to take us through the basic principle of making a sauerkraut.
Yeah, which we can do now.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
so I thought it'd be really nice for your listeners to have some chopping, because it's one of my favourite sounds, actually.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's see how it works out.
So let's see if the mic picks it up.
So take one.
Okay, so first of all, I should say I don't follow recipes.
Right. Okay.
So I will talk through as clearly as what I can in what I'm going to be doing here.
But I
now.
will say, just to interrupt you, that Viola's put over a PDF handout which we can give to people who listen to this podcast episode under the resources section on the podcast page. Yeah. Which they'll find at eatweeds.co.uk. Just click the podcast link and you get to it.
Great, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a bucket chemist, a random cook, intuitive cook, because when I was a biochemist, I had to sort of pipette things at 1 microliter, which is 1/5000th of a teaspoonful of liquid.
Okay, right.
So
yeah, we don't want to scare people. We're not getting into pipetting.
I'm not into any kind of measurements at all, as you discovered. So I've got here a white cabbage and I've got a red cabbage, because actually I want to make something that's pink, because I like colours.
So colour's important for you? You don't just want to have this kind of green mushy look?
I sometimes I go for the green mushy look. But for this one, I know I quite like a bit of pink on my plate. And I've also got a quince, which is a windfall from this little park at the end of my street. So I don't know if that's technically foraging or scrumping or just picking up a quince on my way to work.
Gathering.
I'm
really trying to get away from this thing. I'm a forager. I'm actually a gatherer, because you have hunter-gatherers,
Well, I certainly gathered this. I was well chuffed. Yeah. So I'm going to chop off the bruised bits of the quince.
Have you done quince before?
I have, yeah. I've got the end of a quince sauerkraut at home, which is now, it's almost a year old.
Okay.
And I've been eking it out because it's really, really delicious.
So basically, anyone who's got gluts of fruit or vegetables, and you don't want to compost it, and you recognise there's still food there, this is a perfect way to preserve it.
It's a great way
without poisoning yourself potentially with botulism, which is what canning can do.
Yep.
I remember Sandor saying that he doesn't know anyone in any culture that's ever been poisoned by a lactic acid ferment or wild ferment.
It's true, actually. There's more food poisoning incidents from raw vegetables, salads. So actually, you could say it's actually safer to eat a lacto-fermented vegetable.
But would you sit down and have a whole meal of wild ferments? I mean, are they relishes? They're more relishes rather than...
Yeah, I eat a lot. I would say to anyone you should start off small, especially if you are someone who has gut issues. because it's an ecology you're talking about. You wouldn't sort of, well, you might completely rip up your garden and plant a whole load of different things in there, but if you're really working with your garden, you introduce things slowly and see where the plants like to take up see where their favourite habitat is. So it's very much the same, I'd say, gardening your microbiome. So I'm chopping up the cabbage. I'm chopping it small, so there's a lot of surface area for the bacteria to feast, which is basically what they're doing. They eat the sugars and the other goodness in the vegetables and convert it to they produce lactic acid as their waste product, actually. And then as they produce the lactic acid,
that's going into
a bowl. That's what that sound was. As they produce the lactic acid, the acidity of the ferment increases, and the bacteria that like less acidic environments start to die off, and a new set of bacteria grow in. So there's different phases according to the acidity of the ferment.
Because I've experimented with ferments using whey instead of just salt, which actually was really interesting in the sense that in order to get the whey, because you can't just go out and buy it, I had to make this kind of ricotta cheese, so this cream cheese, and the byproduct of that is whey. And it was like, oh right, okay. And I realised that I've been going down shops buying cheese and had totally missed out this whole kind of cycle that cheese making goes through. So whereas the whey normally is given to pigs or whatever, I mean, we can actually use it to preserve our foods as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a massive fan of using whey in ferments. I think it's a great way to use up what's, actually kind of a waste product, actually, of cheese making.
Yeah.
But what you do is you skip the stages of fermentation. So you're going right in, you're not getting that natural succession of species.
Oh, okay.
And what we're doing here is something called wild fermentation. So whey is a starter. So you're putting bacterial species in there. The bacteria we're using here are soil bacteria.
Okay.
That are found in the cabbage. So then there's this, like I said, a kind of natural succession. And what I encourage people to do is actually, when they make it, is taste. Not only to get to know your ferment really well, but keep tasting at different stages, because there's different bacteria at each stage.
So how long would you normally leave a ferment before it's kind of really mature? I mean, would you start eating it 24 hours later? Because it's still quite salty, isn't it?
So kimchi is traditionally eaten within the first 10 days.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
First couple of weeks.
Okay.
And like I said, sauerkraut, 4 years. I always say eat it when you want it and when you like the taste. It gets softer the longer you leave it, and it gets more acidic. So you get people prefer their sauerkrauts or their kimchis at a different age.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think that you go for the one that you need the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I like the sensory side of it. It's like forget the calendar and the diary. Eat it when it's appealing.
Yeah, and I would say also, I mean, there are loads of different really great things like pickle pipes, and they're all kind of pickling paraphernalia that you can put on the top of your jar that lets the gases out but doesn't let the air get into your ferment.
Right.
And that prevents mold growth.
Yeah.
But I think just doing it really simply with a normal jar is, because you keep opening it, you keep tasting it.
Yeah.
That's my favourite way of doing it.
And what kind of temperatures are you kind of keeping it in? Are you keeping it in the fridge? Are you keeping it in, just on your kitchen top?
So just on my kitchen side, somewhere not too warm, not too cold. I mean, nothing, you know, I don't have a thermometer or anything. And I tend to just keep it away from direct sunlight. But, you know, I'm not particularly precious about it. I literally just stick it anywhere I've got space. Because they do take up a lot of space. In terms of the fridge, well, fridge is a fermentation slowing device, right? You put your ferment in the fridge when it's as crunchy or as soft and as the taste that you like it. So that might be any time between a few weeks to a few months. And then what it does is it slows down the fermentation. It doesn't stop it altogether. So it will carry on fermenting slowly. So yeah, so there are times that you might want to put it in the fridge. So I have a bowl full of a very pretty mix of red and white cabbage shredded. I'm going to grate a bit of this lovely quince as well. So the last time I did this, I chopped the quince up into little bits, but actually it stayed really sort of chewy for a long time, and the cabbage got nice and soft. So this time I'm grating it.
Yeah.
So it's a constant learning process.
Okay, so we've got grated quince, red cabbage, white cabbage, just sliced up.
Yeah.
Nothing, not too fine, not big chunks. Like you said, you want the surface area. And what are we doing next? We've got salt.
So we've got salt. This is the...
But not just any old salt. We can't just use Saxo salt.
You can actually use any old salt.
Iodinized salt.
It will work.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it will work. The iodized salt tends to discolour the vegetables. It may reduce some of the bacteria as well. Normally use iodine to sterilise things, but it does work, so it doesn't kill them off altogether.
Okay.
But I go for sea salt. Usually I go for a nice grey sea salt.
Yeah.
Because the grey indicates that it's full of minerals.
Okay.
And another really great thing about lactoferments is that the digestion of the bacteria make the minerals and nutrients more bioavailable to us, so we can absorb them more easily. So you get some added nutrition depending on the colour of the salt that you use.
Right.
So you can use, a lot of people like to use pink salt,
Yeah,
rock salt,
pink salt stuff,
Himalayan salt.
Himalayan.
If
you're in India, sorry. I've just come back, so people go Himalayas. I was like, no, it's Himalaya actually.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's what the Indians, how they pronounce it. Yeah.
Okay, well, Himalayan salt. I don't like using that because it's mined.
Really?
Yeah, well, it's rock salt, isn't it? It comes out of Himalayas.
God, yeah, of course.
Big holes in the earth, big hole in the Himalayas.
Wow, okay.
So, yeah, so sea salt is, well, it's essentially renewable, isn't it? So I always go for the grey sea salts, or a slightly whiter one. So yeah, this is my bag of sea salt. And again, sorry folks, we've not got measurements here. I'm going to do it by taste. So what I'm going to do is sprinkle on a pinch, a healthy pinch. And we're going to be massaging it into the cabbage. So
that's a real squeeze in between your hands and fingers.
Yeah.
As though you were wringing out a cloth almost.
Yeah, and you can see already, that's getting really juicy. Oops.
So for people who are listening, I mean, the amount of salt is really, just start with a little bit. I mean, a little bit obviously is not really quantifiable, but use your brains. Yeah, it's kind of common sense stuff. Just 1/4 of a teaspoon is probably in a bowl that's got about 500 grams, 700 grams of cabbage. And just keep working it, and you want this. You know you've got the right amount of salt when. Well,
I aim for it's really
when
personal
the liquid
taste.
Starts coming out.
Well, It's down to taste, actually.
Oh, right, okay.
So, like I say, some people prefer not to have salt at all, and that might be because they've got a medical condition or they just don't like the taste of salt. So, after I've done a bit of massaging, so the salt does pull out the juices, so it does make this bit a lot easier. And in fact, you could just salt it and leave it a few hours, and you don't have to do quite so much massaging. So I'm going to taste. Apologies to anyone who's got that thing where they can't bear to hear people crunching that. I'm going to go for a bit more salt. So
okay.
I like to aim for the saltiness of olives.
Okay.
So it's sort of yummy salty.
Right.
So I'm going to go for another good pinch.
Saltiness of olives, that's the way of explaining it. So I like using as little salt myself. Because I mean, some people used to kind of quiz me in a kind of confrontational way, like, yes, but it's salt, and salt's really bad for us, and then someone who was a fermenter said, well, actually, the salt is for the ferment, it's not for the human.
Huh.
Which I don't know whether that's true, but it sounded good. So you're just really mashing it.
And so you can start seeing now, I'm picking it up and squeezing it.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
And you can see, like you said earlier, like wringing out a cloth, you can start seeing the juices coming out as I squeeze into the bowl.
Yeah.
So let's just have another taste of that. So I reckon that
Well, don't offer
fits.
me any.
Would you
I'm
like
gonna get
to?
in there without permission.
What do you reckon? It tastes the quince as well, right? It's really nice, isn't it?
Nice.
So now we get our jar, and I think clip top jars are the best.
Yeah.
But you can use any jar. So this is about 500 mils. I tend to use, if we weren't going for measurements, I think 750 or a litre jar is a good one to start with. So I'm going to start packing it in here and starting off with a little bit and squeezing it down into the bottom of the jar. And what you'll see is the juice is starting to rise up. And what you're aiming for is a jar with the veggies really pushed and packed down in, and a little layer of juices over the top.
Right.
If you haven't quite managed to make enough juice, you can add a little filtered or bottled water.
Yeah.
Don't use chlorinated water because chlorine is there to kill the bacteria.
You know, I just use my tap water.
Do you? And it works fine?
It works absolutely fine. Now, I am in Devon,
Right.
so we have hard water
Uh-huh.
rather than soft, so that may make a difference. But I don't normally bother.
Right.
Which I know is heresy.
Okay. Yeah, it's
to the
probably just me being a
healthies
bit
out there.
precious. So
Right.
I'm just pouring in the last of that juice. So
And you can pound down. I mean, occasionally use a rolling pin.
yeah,
Wood rolling pin, just to kind of, or more
squish it down
pestle
further.
and just squish
Yeah.
it down a bit further.
So the reason you're wanting a layer of liquid, and you want the layer of liquid to be there really throughout the time that you've got your ferment bubbling away on the side, is because the lactic acid production is what's called an anaerobic process. It happens in the absence of oxygen.
Okay.
So you need to make sure that your vegetables are covered with the liquid.
You know, I've just drunk a glass of this London water. I wouldn't make my ferment with London water. That is disgusting tasting water. What is it, 18? It's like urine processed 18 times.
Yeah, homeopathic sewage, yeah.
Oh my God. He says pouring himself another glass just because I'm really thirsty.
What was all that salt you just ate on the chopped up vegetables? So yeah, so now it's just about you put a lid on it, And the reason I say clip top jars is because they've got this rubber seal around, and in the early stages of fermentation, say the first sort of 10 days, depending on whether it's a hot environment or a cold environment, about the first 10 days, you get a bacteria. It's a bacteria called Leuconostoc mesenterides.
Okay.
The name is perhaps irrelevant apart from the fact I really like it. And they produce carbon dioxide as well as the acid. And the carbon dioxide starts bubbling up through the vegetables. And if you have a lid that's on here that's screwed on tightly, you have a glass bomb, basically.
Yeah.
And many a bottle and a jar has exploded in a fermenter's household. So I like to use the clip top jars because they've got this little rubber seal, and you can the rubber seal will blow if it gets highly pressurized, but you can also just let the pressure out. So they've got that little tag on the side. I never knew what they were for. You just pull that and it just goes psh.
They call it burping, don't they?
Yeah.
Burping your ferments.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite a cute phrase, I think.
It is.
Slightly rude.
Yeah, so burp your ferments daily.
Yeah.
Is my recommendation. Certainly if you're not using a jar with a rubber seal. And then you just taste and watch and enjoy.
Okay, so you do clip it.
I
with a kiln?
clip it. Yeah, I've tested it now by mistake, and the rubber seal does blow if you forget to burp.
Great, but okay, because I was under this impression that, because the way I've done it is I would get to this stage of having my salted vegetables in the kiln jar, I would leave the top off, and all I would do is just put a Ziploc bag with water and just keep it in the top, and I keep it like that for a week for the ferment to get going, and then I would clip it shut.
Okay, great. So that is one way of doing it. I don't like plastics anywhere near my ferments, so
of course,
I don't use them.
Or boiled stone or something.
A
like
boiled
that
stone is
use.
great. I actually use like really heavy glass nightlight holders.
Okay.
So as long as you don't have coloured glass, because you don't know what toxins are in the colour, and you don't have antique glass that could have lead in it.
Lead in it, yeah.
Then you're safe with pretty much any glass.
Okay.
But yeah, boiled pebbles is another one.
Okay.
And so the reason you have that is that weighs the vegetables down so they stay underneath the liquid. Another thing you can do is literally just get a spoon every day and just press the vegetables down. And because what you don't want is the vegetables floating to the surface and getting mould growing on them, because they can become a little island that mould can grow on. So that's the reason why you need to keep it submerged. And
if you do get mould, do you have to throw it all out?
So that is really a personal decision. I'm someone who will scoop stuff off. Sandor Katz is someone who scoops stuff off.
Yeah.
Other people wouldn't do that. They prefer to throw it away. So
yeah, I would encourage people just to scoop.
Yeah.
I mean, I made some brined red peppers the other day with my 4-year-old granddaughter, and she did all the work. And then I stuck them on a shelf in our bathroom, and I went away, and I'd forgotten. I came back and there was this hair monster coming out of the jar.
Yeah.
And I just literally took it. It was like a little cap.
And it just
pulled
came
it
away.
up and it just came off, and I took out the one bit of pepper that had gone, all funky. And they're fine. They're absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I mean, why throw that away?
Well, there are people who would argue that the mould, its little roots, the mycorrhizae, are so small that you can't see them.
Yeah.
And they can go right through the ferment, or the spores can. And so I think it really is a personal decision. But if you're quite happy scooping a bit of mould off the top of a jam, then you're going to be someone who's quite happy scooping a bit of mould off the top of a ferment. And to be honest, if you've been waiting for a ferment for several weeks or months, the last thing you want to do is throw it all away. But,
and smell as well, isn't it? I think if it smells and it's appealing, keep it.
I think,
if you're suddenly wanting to retch, then...
Yeah, and it might, it depends how far it's gone down. And I would always scoop off a good layer as well. So, yeah. So that's a very quick tutorial, isn't it?
And so that's then just left for as long as you want, really.
Yeah.
Till it's
Keep
finished.
tasting. and enjoy when you've got it. The ferments don't last that long in my house because they're too yummy.
Yeah. So just to recap, you chopped up some cabbage, not too really fine, but not big chunks either, just as you would normally chop a cabbage for a salad. You added salt to taste.
Yep.
Not salt by quantity, but salt to taste. You mashed it all over, crushed it between your hands and fingers like wringing out a cloth, till the juice started coming out of the vegetables. Then you packed it into your kiln jar, you pressed it down, and you got a layer of liquid just above the vegetables. And that's it.
Yep, and you just make sure you keep checking nothing's floating.
Yeah, and just keep it submerged under that liquid, because if it's under the liquid, it's not going to rot.
Yeah.
It's not going to grow hairy.
Well, all the mold spores and the yeast spores are going to be coming from the air. So the less contact there is with the air, the better. So yeah, keep your lid on it and keep burping it for at least the first couple of weeks, I would think. And then the carbon dioxide slows down, the carbon dioxide production slows down, and you'll see the bubbling sort of gradually stops.
Yeah. So thanks for doing that. It's been really good. It'd be great to see how these sound effects come out.
Yes.
Like chopping cabbage and grating quince and mushing vegetables together in your hands.
So what I'm really passionate about in this stuff is that we're working with soil bacteria here. And this is just one further example of how our human health is intimately linked to the health of the soil, the health of our environment and the land that our vegetables come from. So I always use organic vegetables for that reason, because organic farming tends to take care of the soil in the way that industrial farming doesn't. So I think another reason that we're getting so many health problems that are now being linked to the health of our microbiome is because of things like industrial farming damaging the soil. It's because there's such a great distance from farm to plate, like people aren't living on the land anymore, people aren't getting soil under their fingernails and in their mouths. And so introducing these foods is one way to support our health, but then so is, taking care of the land.
So you were talking about, the caesarean birthing and how the developing fetus needs actually to have certain types of bacteria, but in our modern way of living, those often are not part of the developmental process of the weeded human when it's forming.
Yeah, so that's another way. It really kind of links into our sort of obsession with sterilisation. So thanks to wonderful developments in surgery, basically there's this misconception that healthy bodies and healthy environments are bacteria free.
Sure.
And we now know that's really not the case. So birth is a really good example of this, and other sort of standard medical practices where you're quick to use antibiotics and get rid of the good bacteria. We're now seeing how important those bacteria are. So the womb, until very, very recently, was thought to be a sterile place. We now know that the placenta has a unique ecosystem and unique microbial community there that they think starts in the mother's mouth.
Wow. Amazingly,
the bacteria travel through the mother's body and set up home in the placenta. Incredible, mind-blowing stuff. Wow. And also the umbilical cord. Researchers have analysed the umbilical cord and the developing baby's gut, and the baby is born with bacteria already inside. What also happens in a natural birth, the baby comes out through the birth canal, and it's great. We're born head first and facing our mother's anus. We get a gob full of bacteria on the way out.
Yeah.
And that bacteria, they're lactic acid bacteria again. Lactic acid bacteria live in the vagina. They keep the the environment acidic there, which prevents other infection, just like it prevents mold growth on our ferments. It helps keep our bodies healthy. And those lactic acid bacteria in the baby's gut, ready to digest the first breast milk ideally. And again, the bacteria in breast tissue that then populate the baby's gut as well.
Which boosts the immunity.
Which boosts the immunity again. So, so it's called seeding the microbiome, which is a lovely phrase. A caesarean baby doesn't come out through the birth canal, obviously. Their guts are populated actually from the bacteria in the environment of the hospital. Now we know what the bacteria in the hospital are. And then hopefully the parent's skin, the bedding of the hospital. So there are a lot of autoimmune issues, things like asthma, that are much, much more prevalent for caesarean babies, and ongoing gut issues. So I attribute a lot of my gut issues that brought me into lacto fermentation to being a caesarean baby.
Right.
So you just got that bit sort of a, tougher start in life. And then of course I was a very outdoorsy kid. I was handfuls of soil in my mouth and stuff like that. So that, that really helped over the time, but definitely getting that first mouthful. And there are medical trials now of taking a swab of the mother's birth canal, mother's vagina, and putting that in the mouth of the caesarean baby, and it really does rectify their gut.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's funny because I came back from India a month ago and I had a big discussion with the Ayurvedic doctors and the Tibetan doctors there, and they were saying, the importance of eating with your hands. Because over here in the West, we have knives and forks, and it's considered a little bit kind of weird if you start, at a dinner party, tucking in with your hands. And that actually really, the importance of the bacteria on your hands to keep you healthy, which is why in India they eat with their hands.
Yeah.
So it's, anywhere where we can introduce bacteria, pick that potato off the table with your hands and pop it in, irrespective of the disapproving looks from whoever, parents often. Do it, because any way that we can introduce, healthy bacteria, like you say, seeding the microbiome. Seeding the microbiome is good and can only.
I mean, there are sort of sensible precautions to take around, but it's that sterility. Yeah, basically. Although there's more bacteria on a mobile phone than there is on a toilet seat.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
So that makes you think, doesn't it, in terms of what's healthy and what's unhealthy, and a healthy environment isn't necessarily bacteria free. And then of course, actually, I think more important than anything is getting out of your home the things like antibacterial hand washes and all the other horrendous chemicals that I know you don't have in your home, because it's destroying our health in lots of different ways.
Great. If people want to get in touch with you, because you do run Wild Fermentation workshops up here in London, don't you?
Yeah, London and nearby.
Okay. Yeah. So the southeast, basically. So where do they get hold of you?
So they can go to my website, which is violasampson.com.
Okay.
And there will be a link there that will take you through to the Wild Fermentation workshops. So I also teach complementary therapists about the microbiome, so the bacteria that are essential to health, bacteria and viruses and yeasts and other fungi. So the link is off that page.
Okay, great. And where this, like I said earlier, where this podcast episode is on my website, there is links to Viola's website and also to the PDF handout that will basically talk you through more of different funky ways of playing with funky ferments. Thanks a lot, Viola.
Great. Thanks very much.